You're watching LTV, Comcast 34 and FIOS 26, Livingston.
Good day, Livingston, and welcome to Clergy Corner. On today's show, we're going to explore why some people choose to abandon religious beliefs that once were very meaningful to them, and then what happens to them when they do. Hi, I'm Dan Martian. I'm the pastor at the Presbyterian Church of Livingston and your host. With me on the program today, please welcome Reverend Dr. Rick Vossler from the Grace Lutheran Church, Rabbi Faith Joy Dantowitz, Temple Ben Abraham, Monsignor Thomas Nightinger from St. Philomena's Roman Catholic Church, and Reverend Susan Gillespie from the Trinity Covenant Church. Welcome, my friends. In your experience, Sue, why do people walk away from faith? And we're not talking about faith joy, but we're talking about faith in general.
About the title,
Yeah, I'm sorry about this faith.
Very challenging episode for me.
Yeah, nothing to hurt your self-esteem.
Well, I would suspect that it's because you can't give someone faith. They have to get faith in God themselves. So a person may be brought up in a church or be taught a particular tradition, but faith needs to be a relationship with God that they haven't yet developed. It's one big reason, I would think.
What do you think are some other reasons, Tom?
I think it's, the title being Walking Away from Faith. And, I think there are different ways that we walk away from faith. In the Catholic Church, we often make reference to those who are fallen away, those who just over time seem to cease exercising their faith, attending church, or practicing at least a formal religious expression, and we call them fallen away. They haven't rejected the faith, they haven't walked away from it, they've just sort of... And then you have other people who perhaps maybe because of some trauma or devastation in their life, they either are very, very saddened, very, very depressed, very, very angry, and some of that's directed toward the church, some of it may even be directed toward God, and so they consciously walk away because they feel like maybe they've been abandoned, maybe they've been betrayed. And I guess there's any variety of ways that people walk away or fall away from the church. So I think it's a very wide, much wider than perhaps the title connotes.
Yeah, it's almost like, really, can we ever walk away from faith, or do we walk away from our religious institutions? I think there are two questions there. I think a lot of people have problems and doubts and wrestled around with faith, and they take a little respite, and they wrestle, and they don't feel like it's a safe place that they can wrestle around with in their faith communities, unfortunately. Maybe there are some things. I hear a lot of people who, when traumatic experiences happen with children, they ask the why. Why children? Why could life present this, or why couldn't God prevent this? And then they themselves, because of their own wrestling around, they walk away, and they put it away for a while. Faith Joy, what happens in the Judaism when people have situations?
Great.
Or
Well, a couple things I wanted to address in terms of the title. Great title. Now, but this idea of faith in Judaism, where doubting is a part of Judaism, and it's not like it's forbidden to doubt or to have questions about God. So I think that's a difference here, and we're more a religion of action than of deed, than just saying I believe in God. Believing in God is wonderful, and having strong faith is wonderful, but if you don't, it doesn't mean you can't still be part of the religion and part of the people. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But in terms of people choosing or not, to say walking away from faith or finding it challenging when bad things happen to good people, the title of the book by Rabbi Harold Kushner, sometimes it's because they don't have their own relationship with God developed to a point where it's not just, well, I've done everything right, how could something bad happen to me? You know, whatever their faith is, maybe they need to develop it more, or they need to wrestle more, or maybe they just need a break right now, and there's no judgment on that. It's that they can find it challenging, and find it challenging to feel like God isn't there for them, or there's no connection. The religion can still be there for them if they still want to be part of it. So it's a little, that's
In
important
Judaism,
to
do you support, emphasize, nurture this, or basically, for the lack of any better word, is encourage the doubting?
I think it's not that I don't think we encourage, like, be a doubter. It's just that's valid. It's a valid interpretation to not be sure, to not be certain, and to know that Maimonides, this great philosopher, rabbi, doctor in the Middle Ages, he had 13 principles of faith, and it was very clear and very certain that we can't know God. All these things about God that were certain. I'd say most people can't follow or don't. Their faith isn't like Maimonides' faith, so there are more questions that people have. I've actually been teaching a class this year once a month on God, and you're just like looking at different understandings of God, and basically there's no one right answer in Judaism, so you can have different ways of interpreting God and understanding and what your faith is. It's developing your faith and really coming to understand what your faith is, and it can change over time, and so it's okay to doubt, it's okay to wrestle. I know one of the prayers in one of the prayer books that I've found meaningful is cherish your doubts. Doubt is the handmaiden of faith, and that it helps us to think more about it and to think what we're wrestling with. It's certainly wonderful and easy to say, this is God and that's it, there's nothing else to question. That'd be so easy. I kind of would love that, not to have to question or wrestle, but it's not that way for most people. So there is questioning,
and
there is doubt, and different times in our lives when we've had real challenges tends to be the time when we find people feeling that maybe it's not there for them, that they're not comforted, and maybe it's time when they do come back, and through conversation or counseling or study or just presence of other people, clergy, whoever is there for them, that they come back and maybe they find a renewed sense of faith, and maybe they don't. We don't know.
And it's realistic to say we doubt, and those are very painful times. Through my doubts and through my questions, it was a very much of a wilderness experience for me, and I've come out on the other end. But going through that wilderness, it was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of reading, a lot of talking to people. Thank goodness the people that I talked with allowed me to talk with them about it. They didn't pass judgment. They sat there and listened. They shared their own experiences with me. And that helped me to validate what I was going through was real. I think that is more realistic as people of faith. I don't know how many people say the black and white, this is the way it is, that can really live with that, because we all have our doubts, we all have our scares. How have you helped people in your parish, Rick, that have come to you and said, Pastor, I have all these doubts going on. Am I losing my faith?
Yes, and when people do that, it's important, as you're saying, to listen to them, let them express what their, what their faith is, what their doubt is, what the reason behind their words are, and then look at where in Scripture or where in lives of people whom they respect, how they dealt with that similar situation. But most importantly, it's praying. You're silently praying. Help me to say the right words, or help me to listen, or help me to do what is right to help this person work through the doubts, work through the pain. And it's a lot of listening, and then a lot of going through Scripture, seeing other people who have gone through that same.
Well, we have the heroes of the faith as really prime examples, because all the heroes of the faith had doubts.
Sure.
Look at Abraham. He lied about, well, this is not really my wife. Maybe not lie. Maybe that's a really abrasive word.
Right.
But didn't quite tell the king that, this is my wife. and said this was my sister Sarah. You know, and then you got the doubts of, you know, I'm sure there was Noah and there was Moses, and there was all these heroes of the faith that doubted and questioned. And so we hold them up as heroes of the faith, but we forget that they're human beings like us. And so being human beings is that doubting process.
Yes, the real question is when someone goes through doubts and goes through questioning difficult periods in their life, is where do they turn? Where do they turn for guidance? Important that they turn to someone whom they trust, whom they look up to, and you know, whether it is a clergy person, whether that is a lay person that they know is strong in the faith, or a friend, someone like that. So that's why it's important for, not just for clergy, but for people in general, to know the faith and to know people, and to be able to listen.
And probably been through it themselves.
Sure.
Where they have the experience of it, and they can help someone that is going through, you know, a faith crisis. Mother Teresa, it's interesting because everybody looks at Mother Teresa and they uphold Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa, wonderful work in Calcutta. But then it came out after she passed is her doubts and her fears. Father Tom, how did you deal with that?
I don't think a day passes, and the question you posed to Rick and to all of us, really, a day passes where someone doesn't express some kind of doubt. And I'm not just talking casual doubt that sometimes you have, but really, really severe doubt that they really, as you said in your question, they wonder, am I losing my faith? Am I losing my faith? So, you know, you confront it a lot. I think we all confront it a lot, the question. And my approach has always been kind of like what Faith Joy was saying. You know, that doubts are real. They're real. You're not, you know, I mean, Faith Joy used the word valid. They're real. It's a reality, and I think
number one, painful.
And I think it's number one. It's helpful for everyone to know that everyone has these doubts to greater or lesser degrees, and that it doesn't mean they're losing their faith, and it may very well be the vehicle through which God is using them to bring them to deeper faith. And that's what, like, you know, I think about Mother Teresa, but, you know, I mean, we are, our tradition is filled with saints who had moments like that, moments of great doubt. I mean, you think of St. John of the Cross, and he wrote The Dark Night of the Soul. Go back to Jesus, you know, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forgotten me? Mother Teresa, and it goes through, you know, so it's just, you know, it oftentimes, I think, it's the way we approach what it is. And I think that sometimes, you know, we talk about fear and being afraid that we're losing our faith. I try to reorient them saying, look, this is a way that God is trying to bring you deeper into your faith.
And the one that you quoted, you know, Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? If you look at that as Psalm 22, the beginning verses, but you read through the rest of those verses, it is really a powerful psalm.
I'd like to reiterate the idea that faith is growing deeper, and sometimes that doesn't feel good. You know, I mean, it's Jesus who talks about being born again. Well, born people need to grow, and our faith isn't going to stay the same. And Jesus sometimes calls the disciples, you know, little faith, because they need a bigger faith. But they're going to get there through hard times when they don't know what Jesus is doing, and are afraid and wonder if they've made a huge mistake. You know, and it's in those moments that the faith gets deeper.
And that's a really important point too, in terms of the faith development. That so many of our congregants, our parishioners, they may not continue their studies after a young age. I'm thinking, okay, I'll just think about the synagogue. So some children may leave after they become bar or bat mitzvah, which is 7th grade, maybe 8th grade, depending on when they turn 13. And if they're not studying beyond that, you know, you don't quit middle school. You're still a lot to learn. So in terms of their own wrestling with God and just learning about their religion, it takes some time to develop your faith. And so if you have a faith that's maybe not as developed and you have a challenging time or even a joyous time, the idea that you had of what God is, your relationship with God, it might not fit with where you are as you mature as an adult. So it's important to keep learning. I think that's always the exciting thing when you hear from a college student saying, I'm taking this class on, you know, Introduction to Judaism or religion or whatever it is, and I'm exploring things, and they're looking at it from a more mature angle and really thinking about it and wrestling with it, which is what it takes, because it doesn't. You can't just say, okay, 5 and 5 is 10. That's it. You know, you have to think about it much more than that. So.
Do we come across a lot of people that aren't mature, or people that use the title of our program, Walk Away from Faith? Are the ones who are immature in faith the ones who usually walk away from faith?
I wouldn't say immature in faith. I think that there are people who haven't worked on their faith, and just people who maybe had one strong feeling about what it was or what their faith is, and it's not working. I think, tragedy is a huge challenge to anyone's faith. And, looking at the Holocaust, there are many people who walked away from faith, right? Who just said, no, I can't do this anymore. So I wouldn't judge anybody in terms of is their faith mature or immature. Just that's one example. But I think that it's just challenging. And
in our tradition, I think about in John's Gospel of the bread of life discourse, and also the relative from Matthew, Mark, and Luke when they talk about that. But when Jesus starts talking about himself being the bread of life, and that you must take and eat this bread, and some people say at that point they had to leave because it was just too much for them to take, and they left. Now, I don't think they were necessarily immature in their faith, but had they stuck it out, like the apostles did, or the disciples did, who said, to where else are we going to go? That difficult thing would have brought them through into a deeper faith. So it would have matured. But I don't know. I think they had a faith that was mature enough to follow Jesus and give up what they were doing. And it's interesting to note that sometimes in the scriptures or in the New Testament, sometimes Jesus says to them, "Oh, ye of little faith, ye of little faith." But then on the other hand, he tells the parable of the mustard seed and the yeast, that it's the smallest of seeds and it grows into the biggest of bushes. So you got to measure them all against each other and see how it comes out. But I think it's just orienting people toward a perspective to say, okay, this doubt is not a cause for fear, but it's a cause to go deeper. Don't be scared. Don't run away.
Reframing it in that light.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people they don't really lose sight of God, but because of how people react to certain situations, they look at people more so as the example, and what happens in their faith community and what their faith community upholds. The catalyst for today's show, the theme of it, was a minister out in California who decided that he wanted to try the atheistic world because his faith tradition didn't support gay rights, didn't support women in the pulpit, and he was looking, and the faith tradition's much more of a literalist view. And with his own personal views, he just couldn't do it. So it's a very much of a personal wrestling around. And so he decided to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that's my words, and just walk away from faith and try the atheistic lifestyle for a world, which meant no Bible reading, no praying, being immersed into atheistic writings and talking to the people, going to conferences. And I'm thinking, what is going on here with him? I think it's a personal crisis for him. But he's looking at, my faith tradition doesn't do this with this group of people and doesn't do another thing with equal rights and social justice. And I'm going, what's going on here? And I think a lot of people with faith, they look at that. They look at maybe the Holocaust. They look at 9/11. They look at the external. And this is a catalyst for them to start really doubting, starting to walk away, starting to question. And there's no place for them to be satisfied. Are they looking for something to be satisfied? Black and white satisfaction?
You see, when you tell me that story, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis, and when he talks about it, Grief Observed, his reaction in the pits of his grief. He said a whole lot of terrible things about God, and he wrote this down in a notebook. But in the next notebook, he said, really, he was just trying to hurt God because he felt like God had hurt him. So just because he was saying that didn't mean there wasn't a relationship with God. Being terribly angry with someone is still a relationship, And I think we need to remind people that our relationship with God didn't start with us. It started with God.
Yeah.
God loving us first. And God isn't shaken, and God's not afraid of this, and He's not angry. You know, and He's not leaving us either. You know, and whether or not we may have to leave a particular institution or whatever for whatever reason, but that doesn't make God go away, and doesn't make God afraid either. You know, so we can wrestle through it. God isn't going to go, well, I'm fine then, I'm just going to leave. That's not how it works. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to hear.
Yeah.
And to realize that, you know, we can't control God, and we can't control how God's going to react to us. Oh, we might think it by saying, you know, being like the I'm going to take my ball and bat and go home, and we're going to be the little boy or girl and pout and say, okay, there, God, you know, I'm, you know, not going to, I'm not going to pay attention to you anymore, and you know, I'll show you. And
It says
God's
in the
that
Bible,
loving parent.
we can be faithless, but God remains faithful because He can't be anything but faithful. So our faithlessness does not make Him faithless. So
How do we get people to hear that?
I guess we should probably say it from time to time.
You gotta say it. You gotta say it.
And I think we have to sometimes indict our institutions because we get caught up in protecting, defending, building our institution, and wind up giving people the idea that they need to attend to certain things that they do, and if they don't do that, then they've messed up with God. Or conversely, if they've done that, they've done all they have to do. And then when they're in a place where their faith needs to grow, they didn't know that was coming. So I think, you know, we do have some guilt in that.
Or an indictment on not only in that, but also in, hey, what is most important? What is the real mission of the church? What's the real mission of, you know, your faith tradition? You know, for us, for me as a Christian, it is the faith in Christ. And you know, you talk about the other social issues. Yeah, and oftentimes people within our faith tradition will go, you know, focusing in on that. But wait, hold it. The real mission is what Jesus has done for us, and that's what we have to look at, and that's what we have to present. You know, because sometimes other people from outside, will look at the Lutherans and they'll judge us only on those other peripherals rather than on, hey, what's most important? Or someone who's within the congregation who's thinking about leaving, they'll be angry about some of these peripherals. Like, well, hold on, let's take a look at what's the core?
And I want to just put out there again, just in Judaism, that's not necessarily the only way to approach it. So it's if you're challenged with faith, that it's okay to be challenged with your faith, and it's not like you have to focus only on that. So I want to welcome people to work on their faith, but that doesn't mean that if you're wrestling with your faith and you're feeling like you can't focus on that right now, there's still ways to be included and involved usually. So.
That expression, we don't see the tree through the forest or the forest through the trees or something, but in taking off on what you're saying, you know, we can tend to get lost in all of that stuff, and we can forget the fundamentals or what is really important.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that has propelled Pope Francis into such a spotlight is because he's going back to the fundamentals of the gospel. You know, he's not getting lost in those things, but he's talking about serving and mission to the poor, to the disenfranchised, and he's living it. You know, I think it's capturing people's imagination.
And I think that's the key right there, living it.
Right.
Yeah.
Putting our faith.
Walking the walk.
Yeah.
Not walking away, but walking the walk.
Walking the walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to go jump off of those two things, what you said and what you said, I think too, the New Testament talks about the church being the place where you can be surrounded, and sometimes other people need to hold your faith for you. I just said this on Sunday because something may be happening to us where we're not able to say, I definitely hang on to these things right now. That's okay. We're praying for you, and you don't need to go away. You know, we're fine with that because we've been there too. And it says in Ephesians that we've been given one another to help one another grow up, and that we're none of us mature until all of us are. And if we walk away from that, it's like being children in a little boat in a storm. You know, you're just getting blown around, and you know, being out by yourself is not a good place. So.
Yeah, you need that anchor, and the faith communities anchor us.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, the faith tradition that I attended, it seemed when I observed people and witnessed them going through tough times, I mean, they would leave the faith institution and they would walk away. But the ones that were in the mainline Protestant church, that they seemed to really hunker in. They were anchored by their faith community. They went through the storms in their life, and with strength and with encouragement, and knowing that God was with them. That spoke a lot to me, because I was comparing the people that said, we have the power of God in our church. But the ones who put their faith into action when they really needed their faith was there. And I could see that they held on to their faith communities. And so I think it's really a lot of what we do. And what you say, Sue, is that many times we're the ones that really lift up the folks when they go through crisis, and help them through their faith crisis, because someone was there for us.
Well, we're all partners with God, so we're there for each other in different ways. Gemilut Chasadim are acts of loving kindness. So when someone experiences a loss, often you find God's presence most through the presence of a friend, somebody being there for you, of doing those acts of loving kindness, of bringing you that meal, of sitting and just listening to you, of sitting and letting you cry. That's a way of finding your faith as well, through other people who are also created in the image of God. So we find our faith in being there for one another and supporting one another. And individuals will choose when they're ready to do their work on their faith, but they can also find their faith through other people being there, and find God's presence through the beauty of a snowstorm, through the beauty of a flower popping up in the spring whenever that arrives.
And whatever crisis that we go through, and faith crisis is a crisis. It's very painful. We can get through it, and we can get through what I call the 3 Fs: faith, family, and friends. We can get through anything as long as we have the 3 Fs: faith, family, and friends, because that's part of the community. And I want to be a person or a pastor that will be encouraging, that will be nurturing, that will sit and listen to those who do have the doubts and do have the scares, do have the faith crisis, and to walk with them. And I think this is what we can do, because we've been there. And I think we enter into the pulpit, and we live really what we preach. We lived out the gospel. We live out the heroes of the faith, and what we think the heroes of the faith, what they went through. And sometimes it's very, very quiet, but those quiet moments are the most powerful moments.
Yeah, and that's where we reach out to them, reach out to the people where they are, bring them.
And I think that's it, to be there where they are. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today and for your insights. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us at home today. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to LivingstonClergyAssociation.org. Well, until we meet again, may God's peace be with you.